A woman sits across from a therapist and says something that sounds almost impossible. She knows factually that something terrible happened to her as a child. Family members have confirmed it, but she cannot remember it. Not fragments, not feelings, nothing at all. This isn't lying. It isn't denial in the way people usually mean that word. And it isn't a simple case of forgetting, the way you forget what you ate for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago. Something else happened inside her mind, something your brain is fully capable of doing to any of us, under the right, or rather the wrong, circumstances. Start with what memory is actually supposed to do. Under ordinary conditions, your brain takes an experience and processes it into something coherent, a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, tagged with context, time, and place, filed away in a way you can access later and describe in words. This process depends on several brain regions working together smoothly, especially the hippocampus, which handles the time-stamping and contextual filing that turns a raw experience into a retrievable memory. Under extreme threat, that smooth process can break down entirely. The psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk spent decades studying what happens inside the brain during overwhelming trauma, and his research revealed something that reframes the entire idea of forgetting. Van der Kolk's work found that during extreme stress, stress hormones can actually impair hippocampal function in real time. The brain region responsible for creating a coherent, time-stamped narrative essentially goes offline precisely when the worst thing is happening. Meanwhile, other systems keep working. The amygdala, which processes raw emotional intensity, continues recording. The sensory cortex continues absorbing fragments, sounds, smells, physical sensations. What's missing is the narrative thread that would normally stitch all of that together into something you could later describe as a story. Van der Kolk described this as memory encoded in fragments rather than as language. Sensations and emotional charge stored without the organizing structure that makes a memory feel like something that happened to you in order, at a specific place and time. This is why some trauma survivors can't produce a coherent account of what happened while their bodies still react intensely to specific triggers. A sound, a smell, a particular kind of touch. That reconnect to fragments the conscious, narrative-making part of the brain never had access to in the first place. The memory isn't gone. It was never assembled into the form a memory usually takes. The psychiatrist Lenore Terr, who spent her career studying trauma in children specifically, identified something that adds a crucial layer to this picture. Terr distinguished between what she called Type 1 trauma, a single overwhelming event, and Type 2 trauma, repeated or prolonged exposure to overwhelming experiences over time. Her research found that these two categories produce strikingly different memory patterns. Single-event trauma often produces vivid, if fragmented, memories. Repeated trauma, especially trauma experienced during childhood, frequently produces something closer to psychic numbing, and in some cases, extensive gaps where memory should be. Terr's work suggested that repeated exposure to something overwhelming doesn't just create more memories to forget. It can actively interfere with the developing memory system's ability to encode ongoing threat as discrete, narratable events at all. Instead of many separate memories, the mind sometimes produces something closer to a fog, a general sense that something happened repeatedly, without specific, retrievable instances a person could describe in detail. This raises an uncomfortable and genuinely contested question in the field. How completely can a memory actually disappear, and can it later be recovered accurately? This is where the research gets more complicated and more important to understand carefully. The psychologist Richard McNally has spent much of his career rigorously testing claims about traumatic memory, and his research introduced necessary caution into a field that had, at times, moved faster than the evidence supported. McNally's work found that while genuine gaps in traumatic memory are well documented and real, particularly for very early childhood trauma or in cases involving significant dissociation, memory itself is also highly reconstructive and susceptible to distortion, especially under suggestive questioning or repeated retelling in specific contexts. McNally's research doesn't contradict Van der Kolk's or Terr's findings about fragmented, non-narrative traumatic memory. It adds a critical caution alongside them. The absence of a coherent memory is well documented and real. But the process of recovering or reconstructing a coherent narrative afterward needs to be handled with genuine scientific care, because the same reconstructive machinery that can eventually integrate real fragmented trauma into a coherent story can also, under the wrong conditions, generate detailed, confident, and utterly false memories that feel just as real to the person experiencing them. Put these three researchers together, and a careful, nuanced picture emerges. Extreme trauma can genuinely disrupt the brain's normal memory encoding process, leaving real gaps, especially for repeated childhood trauma. Those gaps aren't evidence of a story invented for attention or sympathy, but filling those gaps back in a way that stays true to what actually happened is genuinely difficult and requires far more care than simply asking someone to try harder to remember. This is why modern trauma-informed practice increasingly avoids two opposite mistakes: dismissing someone's inability to remember as proof nothing happened, and treating any recovered memory, however it emerges, as automatically, perfectly accurate. Both extremes ignore what the actual research shows. The brain can genuinely fail to build a coherent memory under extreme threat, and separately, the process of building one afterward can be shaped by exactly the kind of suggestion or repetition it's meant to overcome. Think back to that woman in the therapist's office, sitting with the strange, disorienting knowledge that something happened to her that she cannot access in any narrative form at all. She isn't broken, and she isn't lying. Her brain did something extremely specific under conditions it was never built to handle gracefully, protecting her, in the moment, at the cost of a coherent story she can now hold on to. Sometimes the most honest thing memory can tell you is that it was never given the chance to remember in the first place.